Okay, good evening, everyone. For those here in person and virtually, to the first Commonwealth Forum hybrid event. One hiccup already. We've had our first speaker cancel. He's very ill, Unnikrishnan Nair from the Commonwealth Secretariat. He's the head of climate change. He sends his apologies and is very sorry he can't be with us. Fortunately, Abhiir, who is our second speaker, has agreed to give us a slightly longer presentation. So thank you for that, Abhiir. Before I hand it over to Lord Chidgey, I just need to get some housekeeping out of the way. As you know, this is being recorded. So for those on Zoom, please keep yourself on mute. And for those here in person, I heard James Brown's going into head teacher mode. So everyone just behave yourselves. Thank you. Let's see, for those on Zoom, if you want to send a question, please send it to the National Liberal Club account. And we'll pick up the questions directly there. And finally, at the end of the evening, we're going to be toasting the Queen's birthday. So if you give yourself some time to go get a glass of something, bubbles, water, beer, anything, we'll just be having a toast at the end of the evening. Okay, so that's all for me. Please join me in welcoming our chair for this evening, Lord David Chidgey.
Thank you. Let's try again. Is that all right? Yeah. First of all, welcome. Great to see you all. Sorry about the change of the program. Poor chap's not at all well. But it does mean we have the bonus of extra time with Abhiir, who's going to extend his presentation from just youth in climate action to youth in climate action and air pollution. I don't think they're directly connected, but we will find out. The other item on the agenda I want to mention is that we have either with us by Zoom or I'm not sure whether it's Zoom or in person, but a gentleman from the Commonwealth Human Ecology Council. Now that explains the mysterious positioning of the slide protector, because you will be watching the slideshow while we sit on the sidelines, as opposed to having them facing us. So that could be quite exciting too. Anyway, enough of that messing around. The first thing I think I have to do, looking at my agenda here, which of course has been changed dramatically with the absence of our guest speaker, is to thank you for coming. Thank you for tuning in. Enjoy the evening and welcome them, or relish the fact that there'll be time for questions later on, particularly as we have fewer speakers than we hope for. So there we are. I think probably the next thing I need to do is to call upon Abhiir Bhalla. Is that right?
Hi, yes.
Hi, good evening, Abhiir. Young youth environmentalist who has worked alongside the UN in India and with the Rampal Institute as a BBC panelist with Antonio Guterres. This is Portuguese, you know, I can't work that out. Guterres, who, as you all know, is the UN Secretary General. Abhiir is going to give us the youth perspective. So we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say. And we're really pleased you've got longer than we anticipated, so you can set out your themes more broadly. Abhiir.
Thank you so much. Good evening to everyone who's present there physically and virtually as well. I think there's a bit of an echo. I'm not sure, but I think someone's yet to mute themselves. But yes, so today I was initially planning only to talk about the role of the youth in climate action. I'll also be talking about air pollution. And so that's normally a 1-hour presentation in itself. But I'm going to condense it down to 15 minutes, which is something I will very ambitiously try and do. But yeah, I think I'll begin with, talking about what I believe and why I believe that youth empowerment and climate action are indeed two sides of the same coin. So there will be a few dramatic examples. Bear with me. But here goes. So imagine for a minute that there is a bomb scare, which poses an existential threat to the safety and security of everyone in the city in which you live. Nobody knows where it is, how large it is, or how to defuse it, just that it exists and that there is no escaping it. Only the top few security officials know of this threat, but they're not keen to make the news public because they're scared it'll create panic. So they decide to issue a red alert so that, people can exercise caution and they can report any suspicious objects or activities. It's exactly the same with climate change. Many people have received a red alert. They know that there's something dangerous out there. But what they don't realize is the scale and the intensity of the threat. Climate change certainly poses a threat to the future of our existence. However, how can people work to eliminate the threat if they don't comprehend the magnanimity of the threat? The biggest challenge that we face today is not climate change. It's the fact that there's a fundamental problem with the way in which we perceive climate change. The need of the hour is not for people to know about the problem. Rather, it's for them to understand the problem and to know how to act on it. So, hello everyone. My name is Abhiir, and I've worked actively as a youth environmentalist for the past 8 years. And the reason I'm making this segue in between is because I've always believed that in order to pay attention to a speaker, you need to know that you know them a bit. Otherwise, you're probably going to just get bored and sort of lose focus. So very quickly introducing myself. I'm currently, I'm based in New Delhi, India, and I'm 19 years old, pursuing my undergraduate studies. But my academic interests aside, I've been a youth environmentalist for the past 8 years. Started out in grade 6, as early as grade 6. And currently I'm working with non-profits, both in India and in England. I'm working with a non-profit called Care for Air in Delhi, which works on air pollution. I'll talk a little more about that when I talk about air pollution. I'm leading a team of around 35 volunteers there. And I'm also working with Youth Connect, which is a non-profit foundation based both in London as well as in Delhi. And we're working to sort of empower the youth there. And lastly, I'm also working with the Ramphal Institute, where I'm producing a climate change podcast, which also is something interesting that I'm going to share stuff about towards the end of my presentation. And most recently, yes, as the chair very wonderfully sort of introduced, I was also recently identified by the BBC World News as amongst the foremost emerging youth environmentalists internationally for my work, more specifically on air pollution and waste segregation. Now, why all of this is relevant is because, to me, a 19-year-old as a youth environmentalist arguably has faced more challenges than an environmentalist who's perhaps 35 or 40 years old. And that's simply because of the fact that, at least in the early days, I say early days as though there have been a lot of them, but at least in, the first 2 or 3 or 4 years of, my journey as an environmentalist, I very often, questioned or not taken seriously, or my ideas perhaps were dismissed. But over the years, I think from one step to another, it's changed, and that's not the case anymore, hopefully. So yeah, I think, and that's the perfect segue to, move into why youth and climate action are two sides of the same coin, like I said. Now, if we, if I think about it, most of the people I'm privileged to know have heard of climate change. And I often find myself asking them, just like I'm asking you right now, to take 5 seconds and think about what climate change means to you. More often than not, the most frequent response that I get are terms such as global warming, melting glaciers, rising sea levels, or even names like Al Gore or Greta Thunberg. But what else? Because more often than not, in my experience, most people's knowledge of climate change is limited to this. And I can't blame them, because these are the normative terms and phrases which are most commonly a part of the mainstream discourse around climate change. But therein lies the problem. Because if you think about it, we hear buzzwords such as virtual reality and artificial intelligence, but how much does the average Joe really know about it? because I believe that climate change and global warming are terms that students hear about and they study in schools. But by virtue of that, they've also been reduced very literally to textbook definitions. The challenge that then arises is that when something becomes a buzzword or when something becomes a textbook definition, there's a certain sense of disassociation, a distance that, if you will, that's created between the word and the user of the words. So AI and VR are certainly looked upon as something which have a wow factor. But by virtue of that, they're also considered to be something that only specialists can truly understand in entirety. And it's very similar with climate change, because climate change has become a buzzword, but people have also started to believe that there's not much they can do about it. Most of the people I talk to believe that there's nothing they can do about it. They believe that a solution to climate change can only be found when governments and corporates and other such institutions work towards a solution. But to be very frank, that according to me is simply nonsense. It's shocking for someone such as myself, who's devoted 8 years of my youth's life to building awareness and to finding solutions for the climate crisis, that people would believe that there's nothing they can do. And that's my argument, that individual action is the most important and it's the most impactful, because it does have a domino effect. And in fact, let me share a quick anecdote, a story. Recently, after my appearance on the BBC, one of India's most prominent newspapers, which I won't name, they reached out to me, and their editor asked me, to write an article on solutions to climate change that individuals could take up in their day-to-day lives. And obviously, I was more than happy to oblige, and I sent them the piece. A few days later, the editor reached out to me and asked me if I'd like to revise it, because he thought the solutions that I'd proposed were too elementary and weren't what they expected from a seasoned climate advocate such as myself. Now, let me tell you what some of these solutions were, which I had proposed. The first one, an example being that, in India, we have a lot of people who have vehicles, whether it's a motorbike, whether it's a car. They tend to sort of, use these vehicles to go to the market, even if it's just 1 or 2 blocks away. Which is not something I've seen to be a common practice in Europe or in the US, or, in a lot of, in many other parts of the world. So it's, the most simple and fundamental suggestion that I made was, hey, walk down to the neighborhood markets, take a cycle, and simple measures like that. Similarly, I had suggested that, switch to composting in your houses, throw out those plastic toothbrushes, use bamboo toothbrushes, which are biodegradable and environment friendly. Similar such measures. There were, of course, a whole collection of them. But the simple rationale which I followed was that, if these simple day-to-day measures were not being adopted by the majority of people in India, then why should I sort of, suggest complex enviroscientific solutions, which are nuanced, which, are when the basic ones aren't being applied, why should I make, more complicated suggestions? So why the story is important is because it's really about shifting the narrative. It's about overcoming this increasing disassociation between climate change and making people aware of their role in addressing the climate crisis, both now and in the time to come. And while I'm on the subject of time, it's also interesting to think of the role that time has to play with regard to climate change. Another drastic comparison, perhaps, but I've noticed that when there's a terrorist attack or a natural calamity, an event which has immediate consequences, there's an immediate response which follows. There's civil society, there's governments, and there's the media. All of them jump into action. But why then is it not the same with climate change? Climate change is resulting in the deaths of millions of people every year, and that number only seems to be rising year after year. The answer to my question then has perhaps to do with time. Human beings tend to concern themselves with what they can comprehend and what they can imagine in most cases. And we don't see or feel the consequences of climate change in the way in which we witness or experience those of a natural disaster. Which is why action on climate change from any stakeholder is more often than not decisive. It's not urgent because of the fact that the consequences aren't immediate. Climate change is affecting our lives slowly and steadily without us knowing. And with each day that goes by, we're inching closer and closer to a point of no return. What then is the solution? Because talking about the problem without talking about the solutions is futile, and I might as well not be speaking in that case. So according to me, the solution is simple. It's to empower and to support the youth and to amplify their voices. The reality is that the vast majority of policymakers who sit in parliaments around the world today are not likely to remain in parliament 20 years from now. Whether that's in England, whether that's in India, whether that's at the UN, that's true for most parliaments around the world. And although we're already feeling the effects of climate change, the really devastating ones will be felt in a few decades from now, 20 or 30 years from now. And my generation has been handed down a planet which has been exploited for its resources mercilessly. And it's also my generation then and generations after mine, which will have to face the impacts of the crimes of exploitation of generations before us. So it's only fair then that we have a say in shaping the policies which will be shaping our tomorrow. Well, I mentioned earlier that there have been hurdles that I faced because of my age. And while it's true that, elder people have an upper edge in terms of lived experiences, it's not fair for younger people or their ideas to be dismissed because of their age. If you think about it, now or in history, a lot of ideas of social reform have emerged from students, which explains the influence and importance of student unions around the world. And human beings, again, as I mentioned earlier, are somewhat averse to change and adapt slowly and steadily over time. So this explains then why older generations tend to dismiss the ideas of younger ones, because perhaps they're afraid of change. And that's exactly why the solution to climate change is intrinsically dependent on the youth. Most young people are unafraid to speak their minds. We aren't tied down by political ideologies. We aren't tied down by organizational obligations which prevent us from sharing bold or revolutionary ideas. And for many countries around the world, including India, climate change isn't yet an election issue, which is to say that it's not included in our election manifestos. Taking the example of India, it wasn't until 2019, just 2 years ago, that the words climate change were included in the manifestos of the two largest parties, political parties in India. And that's shocking for the simple reason that climate change is something we've known about for 30, 35 years, probably more, So it's therefore young people who are most prominently advocating for issues of climate change. And it's then us who are responsible for making climate change an election issue. Because the simple reality is that most politicians are unlikely to care or to act until they have electoral factors motivating them. It is us who must advocate for climate change to first become an electoral issue, and then to ensure that politicians make it an issue which has bipartisan support. It's crucial that both of them are there for this to be successful. And we need to change our strategy around climate change messaging. Human beings are selfish. And if talking about the damage to the planet has not worked, we need to start talking about the impact on human beings. In 2019, India lost 1.67 million people due to air pollution related complications, 1.67 million. And scientists research, there was an article in The Guardian a few months ago, which showed that the coronavirus may have emerged because deforestation has weakened the man-animal zoonotic barrier. If human beings don't care about the ill effects of deforestation, maybe they will care when they learn how it's landed them in a pandemic. I'm not advocating for an upheaval of the system. I'm not saying that we should go from 0 to 100 in 3 seconds like a Ferrari. That's just not viable and it's unrealistic. But what I am advocating for is for existing institutions to support and to amplify youth voices, to make climate governance more inclusive, and for everyone to make piecemeal changes. We don't need 100 people living a perfectly sustainable lifestyle. We need millions of people living an imperfectly sustainable lifestyle. We don't need, 100 or 200 people doing everything under the sun, solar panels, electric vehicles, etc., etc. We need millions of people doing their little bit, 20, 30, 40%, to protect the planet and to sort of try and undo the damage that's been done. So it's really about, understanding that climate change is real, it's here and it's now. And we must act now, if not to save the planet, then to save ourselves and to save generations after ours. So yeah, those are, those were my thoughts on the linkage between the role of in climate action. And one more thing that I will say, the best example of why we need, youth voices to be supported is because I'm sure you all know that COP26 is coming up in November, and we don't know yet whether it's going to be virtual or physically held, but virtually or physically held. But what I do know is that the Indian government has never sent a youth delegation to a climate change conference. Other countries have, India has not. And India is not the only country. And more than that, the problem is not that it's not the fact that the Indian government is not sending a youth delegation. The fact is that the UN needs to be a lot more inclusive. Why should there be just one Greta Thunberg? There needs to be a lot more Greta Thunbergs from each country representing their youth interests, representing how climate change is affecting them in their countries. So the UN needs to make conferences such as COP26 much more accessible. And I can tell you, I've been trying to reach out to the UN and I've got a lot of responses, but none of them have got me a foot into the door in COP26. And that's after I've been working on this for 8 years. So, there's proof that this needs to be, the system needs to be more inclusive. It needs to be more, it's not, I can't say we need a perfect system, but we definitely need a better system. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the role of the youth in climate action. Ms. Robinson, how much time do I have left? Because I'm accordingly going to pace myself for the air pollution presentation then.
Well, it's not my role to give the vote of thanks to you, but can I just say that was a stunning presentation, and thank you very much for that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
My good friend and colleague and excuse, James Brown, is going to give you the vote of thanks, and I think you will. When James, when you finish, I've got a couple of points I'd like to add.
If I'm sorry to interrupt, but just a quick question. Ms. Robinson had requested me to talk about air pollution as well. So is there time to do that, or yeah, just wanted to check on that.
Yes, of course. Okay. We're fine for time. So 5 minutes.
Well, I'm compressing a 1 hour presentation into 15 minutes, but let me know how much I can, how much I had.
You've had about 20 minutes so far.
Okay.
So what? Seven. I'm told 7 minutes.
Okay.
And the lady on my left.
Sorry, that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. I will 7 to maybe I will squeeze it into 7 to 10 minutes if that works. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Perfect. So, well, talking about air pollution, which is where the key area of my work has been over the past 8 years. I'm just gonna, just give me a second, just gonna skip through since I have 7 minutes, I'll just talk about the more important stuff. Well, types of air pollution. When we talk about air pollution, very often we're only looking at outdoor air pollution. What we don't realize is that indoor air pollution is just as much of a threat, because in the cases of most people, we don't have houses which are so, I don't know, so sort of tightly contained that air doesn't slip in. You always have your exhaust fans in your kitchen, or you have some in your bathroom, or you have cracks above your doors and windows. So very often, especially in the case of urban centers, air pollution, which is outdoor air pollution, does tend to become indoor air pollution. So, that's there. Talking about indoor air pollution, and of course, in rural areas, we have sources of indoor air pollution which come from wood, charcoal, burning of fossil fuels for cooking, etc., etc. But this is, I would say, mostly basic information. What I would want to talk about and spend more time on are some of the myths which exist around air pollution. And some of these are India specific, because I generally use this presentation at schools, colleges, and corporates around India, but nonetheless, they're still relevant. One very popular sort of misconception or a myth which exists is that air pollution is a problem which only exists for certain months during the year. In Delhi, for example, we have air pollution during October to February, or other people think that we have air pollution from October to February. But the reality is that air pollution is a year-round phenomenon. And just because you can't see it all year round, because it's sort of mixing with the smog, and it's mixing with the fog, and that's when you can see it. It does not mean that air pollution is not there throughout the rest of the year. Very often in Delhi, I know so many people who say, "Oh, hey, it's a sunny day. That the air is so clean," but that's not true. If you have a look at your AQI monitors, the air over here on an average day would be anywhere between 150 to 250. It's a large range because it depends a lot on the wind, so channels which also come to Delhi. Um, Other than that, other myths which are there is, a very popular sort of misconception or a myth which is there in India is the fact that, oh, as Indians, we have a very strong immunity. We'll sort of, just breathe in this air and we'll, be fine, and our immune system will develop a response to it. But that's not true. There was a survey which showed that the lungs of Indians, the lung capacity of Indians is 3 times lesser than that of those staying in Europe. And it also factored non-resident Indians. So it shows that it's not something that's genetic. It's purely by virtue of the air that we're breathing. And this is true for London as well, to a certain extent. Of course, air pollution is an issue which varies from, city to city, country to country. But air pollution is harmful for our health, no matter where we are staying. And another point that I would like to very quickly make is that typically these days, especially, and in the scientific community as well, when we're talking about air pollution, we tend to talk about PM 2.5, PM 10, which is particulate matter, right? That's stuff which is so much smaller than your hair, you can't even see it. But what we often don't consider when we're talking about air pollution is our VOCs, which are volatile organic compounds, which are, if you get your house painted, that's actually a form of air pollution as well, because the fumes from the paint are pretty harmful for your health too. Similarly, the whiteboard markers that we use in schools around children, those also give off volatile organic compounds. So, stuff like that is sort of goes under the radar. When we talk about air pollution, it's either from the perspective of PM 2.5 or it's from the perspective of carbon dioxide. So that's also there. I'm just skimming through my presentation now because of lack of time, but these are some of the sources of pollution. And interestingly, very often, if I ask people, they would say, if I ask them, what do you think is the primary source of air pollution? Most people would say industrial emissions. But statistically speaking, for India, and I'm told that it's true for most of the rest of the world as well, the most prominent source, or the primary contributor of air pollution, is actually vehicular emissions. And the proof of that lies in the lockdowns that we've seen, both in India and in London. In Delhi, for example, air pollution reduced, or you can say the air quality improved by 79% during the lockdown. So that's just, I mean, there's no better proof than that for the sheer huge contribution that vehicles have to air pollution. So that's talking about sources. This is stuff I can skip. This is an interesting thing. If there's anyone here from the education sector, you might be interested in this. This is something called the Responsible Sports Protocol. Most schools and colleges, and I mean, any institutions where there are students should be encouraged to follow this. If your AQI is within these given parameters, then you should not exercise more than the recommended amount. So for example, in Delhi, on an average day, the AQI would be between moderate to poor, which is 101 to 300. So schools actually should not be letting kids play outside for more than 40 minutes, but it's probably a lot more than that. You know, they're playing outside at least for an hour, hour and a half. So that needs to, you know, these are certain protocols which educational institutions need to implement. This was developed by Dr. Geeta Sinha. And this is sort of gaining popularity around the world. So this is something interesting I thought to share. Other than that, talking about how air pollution impacts our health, short-term effects are, of course, headaches, eye inflammation, coughing, sore throat, etc. But the long-term effects, which tend to go unnoticed, you know, in the larger scheme of things, are it impacts your liver, it has an impact on your respiratory system, cardiovascular system. And to put it very simply, I'm not a biologist, but to put it very simply, when you're breathing in PM 2.5 or when you're breathing in other, you know, pollutants, it's entering your bloodstream through your nose and your mouth. It's going into your lungs. And when it's going into your lungs, it's, I'm missing out on the name. I think these are called alveoli or something like that. Through these alveoli, it goes into your bloodstream. And then this particulate matter coagulates, it gathers on your organs, whether it's your brain, whether it's your heart, liver, kidney, whatever. And of course, by virtue of that, it's you know, adversely impacting these organs. So yes, this is a very graphic picture, so I'm not going to sort of stay on it for very long. But this actually compares two lungs. The one on the right are the lungs of someone who stays in Delhi, who's a non-smoker, as compared to the one on the left, which are the lungs of a non-smoker in a hill station where the air quality is much better. Mind you, these are non-smokers. So this goes to show the impact of air pollution on our lungs. Lastly, and very quickly, I hope I have a minute or two left, talking about what we can do about it, which, you know, as part of my address also I mentioned. I think the simplest and most important thing is to sort of switch to public transport, or to sort of enforce transport regulations. Don't let your trucks and your transport vehicles be overburdened, because then they're inefficient. And when they're inefficient, they're polluting much more. Similarly, ensure that, you know, the fuel norms are being implemented. This is a phenomenal map which shows how the fuel norms have been implemented according to timelines around the world. India currently is, well, trying to adopt BS6, which is the equivalent of Euro 6 standards, but that's yet to happen very successfully. We're still at BS4, BS5, but we're getting there. So similarly, waste management, waste segregation needs to happen. You know, I know so many people in India who are segregating their waste, and this is true again around the world. So many people who are segregating their waste into the three sort of, you know, different dustbins, but the municipal authorities are then sort of taking them and dumping them all together in one place. So you need to ensure that it's not just you who's segregating your waste, but it's also waste which is being, well, waste segregation doesn't need to be just at site, at source, it also needs to be at site. That's the simplest way of, you know, sort of explaining it. Crop stubble burning is a huge problem in India, which is there, you know, especially in the winter months. We need to find, better technology, which we found, but we need to find a way to sort of make it better accessible to farmers around the world, to farmers around the country. And again, a lot of developing countries, even in Southeast Asia, are facing issues because of this. So what can we do? Protect yourselves, check the AQI regularly through your smartwatches, smartphones, or apps. Disregard the names here. These are names which are relevant to applications which are only in India, but I'm sure there are similar such applications. In fact, Air Visual might be an international application as well. There's also IQ Air, which I know is international. So these are some fantastic applications. And of course, we're all used to wearing masks by now, unfortunately. So that's something we need to do more often when the air quality is not good. And these are some of the things we can do at home. save water, turn off the lights and fans. I know that's something my dad keeps telling me to do. Switch off your lights and fans when you're not in the room. Give away clothes which you don't use. Upcycle, recycle, reuse. Very often we talk about the 3 R's in environment: reduce, reuse, and recycle. But there's also a 4th R, which is refuse. Don't sort of purchase things or engage in activities excessively when you don't need to. So yes, that is my presentation. This has been very rushed. Sorry about that, but I hope I have done justice to it. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for yet another fascinating presentation. So James Brown, can I call upon you to provide a vote of thanks?
Yes, certainly. What I would like to say, first of all, is that the passion and knowledge you've displayed makes those of us who are young at heart very pleased to see the youth of today coming through, and especially the way in which you emphasise solutions rather than just finalising problems. I think it's very important that today we look at positive ways in which we can tackle what is going on. And I think we're indebted to you for stepping up to the plate and explaining not only for us the challenges of climate that we have, but also with air pollution as well. I was fortunate enough to be part of a delegation who went to India not so long ago, and we visited Delhi and we saw some of the pollution there, so I can empathise to an extent some of the issues you were talking about. But what I would emphasise is that you have made an outstanding contribution tonight. I'm sure that everybody will go away from here thinking positively about what we've got to do. You emphasise individual responsibility, and that is something we must all take on board. Individual responsibility. We can all make a difference. And so thank you very much, Abhiir, for your contribution tonight. Many congratulations.
Thank you, James.
I don't think anybody on Zoom could hear that. And with perfect timing, here's Subu with the microphone.
Steady now, steady. Well, we have some time to, and if Abhiir is happy with this, to take some questions. I have 3 so far, three members who wish to ask you some questions, if they may. Firstly, Rapin Kalra, who's here in person, I think. Yes, from the Commonwealth Human Ecology Council. Ripin, would you like to come forward?
So thank you very much. If I may, I'll say a few words about CHEC as well. So my name is Ripin Kalra. I'm a trustee of the Commonwealth Human Ecology Council, CHEC, which was founded by Zina Daesh in 1969 and has observer status with ECOSOC, the UN ECOSOC. CHEC deals with the fundamental issues of how humans extract resources from nature, like with fisheries and with mangroves and ponds and water resources and bees. These are the fundamental issues that affect people on the ground. And I think I'm very kind of proud to be part of this organization, and I'm absolutely delighted that there are so many people on the Friday evening who have chosen to come here and actually attend this meeting, and want to congratulate the speaker on the fantastic presentation that he made there. So I can't say that enough. In fact, you're welcome to join CHEC. I'll just say that. Yeah. My question is that, and this is a question to the speaker, but also open to other members. The COP26 has almost like a list of 5 a day that's prescribed for governments. There's finance, there's transport, there's energy, there's resilience, and there's nature-based solutions. These are the themes of COP26. Sitting in the locations where you are, which one do you feel is the most doable, and which one is the most furthest in terms of doability from where you are sitting? That's my question.
I'd like to take another question if I can, so that we can take them in groups to make sure I get everybody in. So the next questioner is Christopher Khalidal, who's on Zoom. who is the CEO of the Paddy Ashdown Forum. So Christopher, through the magic of electronics, can we hear from you?
Who can I pass
Sure.
on?
Thank you. Well done, Abhiir, taking on this task and speaking on your own tonight. And thank you for your presentation. I do actually have a pre-prepared question, which was for the whole evening, but related to that, I was very interested to hear your thoughts on air pollution. And certainly looking at solutions, certainly there's a lot of work, particularly which I do also in probiotics, which can tackle waste, which can tackle indoor air quality, outdoor air quality, link it to creation of potable water, energy, and so on and so forth. And it was interesting also that you did at least mention volatile organic compounds, because they do go under the radar. And a little known fact that particularly in a city like London with many office blocks, we have many cleaners, and they're all forced to use chemical cleaners instead of probiotic cleaners. And a study was done by the University of Oslo, which actually showed that an office cleaner using chemical cleaners, even just after a year, has the lung function of someone who smokes 20 cigarettes a day. And so certainly one of the solutions where we can actually interact and connect a great many of the issues that cause emissions and waste can actually be connected together. So the question I really wanted, which also is related to that, is of course, when we're actually looking at planetary distribution of threatened and declining species, biodiversity loss, which is subject to multiple stresses, with climate and human activities being a fundamental cause of that stress. And multiple stresses to biodiversity loss, climate change receives the greatest attention, since it can change both the composition, structure, and function of ecosystems, as well as reshape the distribution of biodiversity, which also links to my sort of preview points. So accordingly, to rapidly advance international action to deliver the necessary and rapid decline of emissions, because we're currently pumping out 40 billion tons of CO2 equivalent a year, and we need to turn it into reducing it by 10 billion tons a year. We need to reverse the multiple stresses upon the biosphere. So currently there is no coordinated, integrated and holistic policy mechanism to halt the decline of biodiversity loss at the speed and depth needed. And I'd be very interested to know your thoughts on the logic of uniting the COPs. We've mentioned COP26 on a number of occasions this evening, but there's COP15 in China in October, which is to do with biodiversity. So I'd like your thoughts on, should we actually not be combining the COPs of climate change and the COPs of biodiversity into a more meaningful and integrated single conference?
Thank you very much, Christopher. And now the third question for you, if I may, Abhiir, which is from Janet Berridge, who's on Zoom.
Thank you very much. Yes, my question is also linked to what has happened in the last 18 months, since we've had the virus crisis. Everybody suddenly noticed that there was far less air pollution. There weren't so many aeroplanes in the air, and in harbours that take on cruise ships. Suddenly the water was so clear. They got dolphins playing in the harbour in I think it was in Lisbon, and everybody thought that was wonderful, and isn't it good, and things are quieter. But now that we're getting some progress on vaccination and everything, you hear everybody around you saying, "Oh, I'm dying to go on holiday. Where shall we go?" And they're starting to book flights and travel and all this sort of thing. I thought that, I really did naively perhaps think that people had got it when it came to climate change and pollution. And I thought we were really going to have a push, especially from young people, saying this can't go on. How do you think in general, all over the world, we can hold governments to account, because at the end of the day, it has to be governments who implement change. How can we do that?
Thank you very much, Janet. So there you are, Abhiir. Questions from Repin, Christopher and Janet.
Thank you. I'm just rapidly typing notes because I'll lose track of all three questions otherwise. Just a second. Yeah, so I think starting with the first one, what I think are the furthest and nearest sort of themes which we can sort of, achieve with regard to what Mr. Sharma announced, Alok Sharma announced with regards to COP26. Well, I think for me, the most, and I'm saying this in my, on the basis of what I know and in the basis of my experience, I can't claim to have know everything under the sun, of course, but my knowledge would indicate to me that clean energy is what we're closest to achieving. And I would say clean transport is what we're furthest from achieving. Simple reason being that clean energy is something that, again, drawing from my experience and knowledge, India already met its target for renewable solar energy, not renewable energy, solar energy, well in advance. So, and we've sort of doubled that target. And most other countries, well, I can't say most other countries, but simply saying, I think clean energy is what we can achieve very realistically. It's not something which is unrealistic. It's increasingly becoming cheaper. Technology is increasingly sort of advancing in that direction. I today learned about a windmill which produces energy from wind and water at the same time. So that was fascinating. Goes to show that, we are making progress there by leaps and bounds. And why clean transport seems to be the furthest, I don't know how it is around the world, but right now our existing public transport system in India is flailing. We don't have enough capacity even during normal times, and during the pandemic there needs to be social distancing. And the fact of the matter is that if our public transport system is not equipped with, with the public transport system being powered by fossil fuels, if it's not equipped to handle the crowd and population that we have, I don't think we're going to achieve clean transport in the larger, scheme of things very soon, because clean transport encompasses not just personal transport, but also public transport, which is arguably more important. So thank you for that. I hope that answers the first question. Moving to the second question, which I have divided into two parts, talking about biodiversity loss and talking about linking the COPs. Well, biodiversity loss, honestly, is, I always look at it as different parts of a puzzle, right? Climate change is a 9 or a 10-piece puzzle, and you have to put air pollution, biodiversity loss, I don't know, fossil fuels, clean energy. You have to put all these 10, 12 pieces together, and that's when you have climate change. So I think it's very important, especially given, I mentioned the example of how COVID may have emerged due to deforestation. And that also is biodiversity loss because, how should I say, wildlife or animals or birds or even, more relatively domestic animals, dogs and stuff, are moving from, forested areas into rural areas. And through rural areas, the zoonotic barrier is sort of being reduced. So I think biodiversity loss is an integral part of, climate change, because it's, deforestation, and by virtue of that, or in the case of oceans, ocean acidification, and by virtue of that, marine life and wildlife is being impacted. So, it's a complicated problem. What can I say? We need everyone to work together on this one. Talking about linking the COPs, that's a phenomenal point. I think there needs to be a linkage for sure, but they can't be done all together. Simple reason being that I haven't, I've not been a part of every discussion, or I've not seen even some of the online versions of the previous COPs which have happened. But in my experience, the UN tends to be, or from what I've heard and seen, the UN tends to be they can procrastinate at times on certain things, to put it mildly. And if we have a simple topic, even having these 5 themes is a bit too much for just one COP26. I don't think they're going to do justice to even 3 of those. So you need to have like 1 or 2 themes in each conference, which is for a week or 10 days or 3 days or 4 days, whatever it is. And then really discuss the hell out of that, juice it for all its content, understand every aspect of it, look at solutions, and then take it forward. So linking them all together will just lead to more of this, more themes, and not necessarily a very productive, outcome. So there definitely, there needs to be a link that, okay, at COP15, we discussed this. At COP26, what did we take away from COP15? Stuff like that, or vice versa. So those linkages need to be there. Finally, the last question on the impact. Yes, definitely. Like I said, even Delhi's air quality improved by 79%. But honestly, the simple sort of my understanding is that COVID or not, the world will not stop traveling, unfortunately. We'll always have millionaires and billionaires who want to go around on their private jets from one country to another, or even people who want to, just holiday and move from one place to another. And it's not possible for everyone to sort of, go by ship like Greta did from I don't know, a few years ago. So I think I don't think that even though we saw the impact, or I should say the sort of, positive outcomes that are staying indoors had, I don't think that's going to, make people care, because like I said, human beings tend to be selfish. As far as how to hold governments accountable, it goes back to making it an electoral issue, right? And that's why individual and youth action is important, because when young people are working on it, we're inspiring others. If out of there are 20 online and there are probably 15 over there, so between 35 people here, if I can get even 7 people to live a more sustainable lifestyle, and then they can influence 7 others in turn, that's how individual action is building up to societal action, and then that becomes communities. So by virtue of doing that, you're making sure that your politicians know that this is something you care about. And I'm probably answering these questions for too long, but one very important example to answer this is that in Delhi, in India, not just Delhi, in India, every year we have this festival called Diwali, where firecrackers are burst extensively, and it's very polluting. And we have the National Green Tribunal, which is basically the environmental court, which bans firecrackers each year. Has been doing it for the past 5 or 7 years. And this year, in 2019, I thought, hey, pandemic, it won't be that bad. But there were 12,000 complaints filed. And these are just complaints which were filed. So there were a lot more which were actually, incidents which were happening. Now, you can't expect even the most efficient police force in the world to go out and arrest 12,000 people in one night, right? So it needs to come from society. It needs to come from us. And when we obey the laws, rules, or follow the recommendations of governments, that's when we'll make our legislators know we care. And that's how we hold them accountable, by showing them, not just telling them, showing them that we care. So I hope that answers your question, and thank you for such fantastic questions.
Thank you very much, Abhiir. We've got a few minutes left, and I've got 2 more questions I'd like to put to you. So can I ask the questioners to keep it short and succinct to give Abhiir a chance to answer them? So the questions are from Noel Hajimichael, followed by Lee Dargu, who's on Zoom.
Hello, Abhiir. Thank you very much. My question is, I love your 3 R's, adding 1 R to make it 4. Is it possible to even go further? And you've mentioned politics, and at the moment, politics is very nationalistic and very centered on just your own country, courtesy of the pandemic. So is there a strategy to re-engage and reignite a national discussion on the environment and climate change? So at least country by country, especially in the Commonwealth, places like Singapore, Canada, India, and Nigeria, can actually make big steps. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Noel. And Lee, I can see you there on the screen. You've unmuted. Great. Let's hear your question.
Thank you. Lovely to be with you all again. Abhiir, fantastic presentation. You've mentioned about going to COP. I beg to move, we just make you Prime Minister and let you get on with the job. So my day job involves sustainability. And like you, I recognise that it's a hard task to convince people to do what we need to do. So as we're looking at a future problem, but we want people to take immediate action, we therefore kind of need to look at immediate rewards. So in the corporate world, they've suddenly said now, oh, we love the environment after all, but they recognise a PR chance and they want to sell new products and new services. And for people, you know, there's debates around, should we give people some money for recycling products or something? So do you think, as unfortunate as it is, that things like financial incentives are kind of one of the main drivers for both people and corporations?
Okay, thank you for those questions. Wonderful questions again. Taking the first one first, reigniting a national discussion on climate change. Definitely, I think politics are becoming very nationalistic all around the world, and you know, it is and sort of the hardline positions are a little difficult to reconcile with, very difficult to reconcile with, but I'm not getting into that right now. You know, I think the simple answer is yes. It is possible to reignite a national discussion on climate change. And the reason being, and this goes back to my point that, you know, that this is exactly why we need hundreds of thousands of Greta Thunbergs, because we can't just have, we need an Abhiir from India, we need X from X country, we need, you know, we need at least 2 or 3 voices from each country. If they can increase national pride by representing the country at international forums, that's the best place to start. All politicians love to thump their chest. They love to sort of, you know, say that this is something we're doing. So that's a fantastic place to start. Other than that, also linking it, and this is actually the perfect bridge to the next question, which is regarding incentives. Climate action needs to be incentivized, and people think it's, well, they rightly think it definitely is an expensive affair, but it's increasingly becoming less expensive because of the developments in technology. Solar panels in India 7 or 8 years ago were unimaginably expensive. But I think we're in 2021. So roughly 4 years or 5 years ago, I managed to convince my school to put solar panels on our roof in the school, you know, and what we need to make people aware of are that, sure, we'll give you incentives, but incentives will not necessarily be monetary in the immediate sense. They will be monetary in the long run. You may spend a lot of money on a solar panel initially, the initial investment is heavy, but 5 years later, you're making money on that. You're getting money back from the grid. So, you know, and of course, government incentives, you need to have subsidies on things like solar panels, electric vehicles, encouraging people. And that's exactly the key to reigniting this national discussion, because subsidies are the way forward, at least in the case of developing countries such as India. Because, you know, that's the only way you can make the larger population switch to methods which are more sustainable and, you know, drive them towards taking action on climate change. So yeah, I hope that sort of answers your questions.
Abhiir, thank you very much indeed. We've now come to the end of our time. We've had I think I have to say, enthralling hour, thanks to your contribution. So we have a tradition here in the National Liberal Club at this time of the year. It's that time of March, which is very close to the Her Majesty the Queen's official birthday. We normally have a reception at the club, but of course we can't do that this year. So it's almost, well, that's interesting. I've just seen arrive these glasses which appear to have champagne in. So I'm really embarrassed because I can't ask you to join me in toasting Her Majesty the Queen, but I hope you'll share the sentiment anyway. And thank you again, all of you, for your contribution. Thank you.